Afternoon, good morning, namaste. On behalf of Central Zoo Authority and Sri Chamarajendra Zoological Gardens, I welcome you all to the fifth in the series of webinars we have initiated to reach out to the zoo community on topics that are of mutual interest and also to bring to you global experts who are well known and respected in this field. Today, through this digital platform, we bring to you some very esteemed speakers to discuss and dwell upon the aspect of conservation designing for ex-situ facilities. At the onset, I would like to welcome Dr. S.P. Yadav, IFS, ADG Project Tiger, and Member Secretary, National Tiger Conservation Authority and Central Zoo Authority. Dr. Yadav is an Indian Forest Service officer of 1989 batch of Uttar Pradesh cadre with a distinguished career in wildlife management. He has been instrumental in bringing policy reforms for global tiger conservation, besides leading the new facilitatory role of Central Zoo Authority. Over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Sonali, and very good morning to Eric, and good afternoon to Mehta Saab and all other participants who have joined this webinar. I welcome you all in this webinar. In efforts of CZA to bring in, rope in the global best practices, the global best speakers, in that series, today we have invited Erik and Dr. Rommel Mehta. They are very well known experts in their domain of expertise. So briefly about, I'll tell you about the Central Zoo Authority. Unlike other countries, in India we have Central Zoo Authorities, which often called CZA. And CZA is the statutory body works under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And when we say statutory, means it has been created under the Wildlife Protection Act of the country. So basic role of CZA is regulatory in nature. But we are trying to facilitate all our zoos in the country to adopt best global practices, to come up with the global standards. We are also a member of WAZA. So many speakers from WAZA community, they have been part of our webinars. Basically, in India, Eric, you would be, this will be information for you. Any zoo, if want to be created, if it has to be created or it has to be operational without our permission, without the permission of CZA, it's not possible. So legally, they require permission from CZA for creation, establishment and operation of zoo in the country, in India. So all activities pertaining to creation, establishment, zoo designing, everything has to be approved by the CZA, like zoo layout, preparing master plan, design of animal enclosures, and animal exchanges, what an animal collection plan, all these things they require to be approved by the CZA. And for this, CZA has several committees. We have a specialized design committee, we have technical committee, and finally there is an authority comprising of experts across the country. So basically, if you see the rule, to implement the mandate of CZA, we have various rules and regulations issued by the CZA, and time to time we have been issuing this. There are 152 zoos in the country. There are many large zoos, medium, small and mini zoo. They also include rescue centers. They are spread across the country. And if you see, I consider the zoo designing, the topic of today, as one of the most important things. We are keeping wild animals in captivity. So it becomes our responsibility to provide them as close as possible the natural habitat. And for that matter, if we want to keep lions in the captivity, we must create habitat of lion, which is very similar to the wild. If we want to bring tigers, we want to keep tigers in captivity in a zoo, we must ensure that we create a mini habitat of a tiger reserve or tiger in the zoo itself. And I recently, last year, I visited Temkin Zoological Park in Buenos Aires during WASA conference. And I'm also impressed with another ZSL, Zoological Society of London, that London Zoo. Because when we look at any enclosure, look at any animal, this feels like you are looking them at a wild. So that's the beauty. That's what we want in our country. Like if you take photograph, for that matter, of any zoo or any wild, people should not be able to differentiate between the two situations. So providing a wild animal a near natural habitat, that should be the prime objective of zoo designing. And particularly, I don't want to see much concretization, concrete structures, pakka structures in the zoo premises. So zoo design, I believe, is very, very important aspect of giving foundation, creating foundation of any zoo for future. So I think today we'll hear Erik, who will bring in the expertise from the world, and Dr. Rommel Mehta, who has been working for the zoo for past, I think, more than a decade, and bringing in good changes in the zoo itself. So with these words, I close my remark. But one thing, again, I would like to repeat in the end that because we are keeping wild animals in captivity, it becomes our moral responsibility to provide them a natural habitat in the zoo or in the captivity itself. So that is our prime responsibility. With these words, I close my remarks, and I'm looking forward for presentation by Erik and Dr. Mehta. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we all agree that conservation and animal welfare is the prime objective when we are looking at zoo design, or for that matter, even the establishment of zoos. And now we have expanded the scope to include all other ex-situ conservation facilities such as rescue centers, safaris, and so on. So there is a tremendous scope there. And for that, I would now like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Erik van Vliet, who has been working as a zoo designer for the last 28 years and has been involved in master planning, exhibit design, and brainstorming about new concepts for zoos in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. He is the author of Exhibiting Zoo Animals book and a very recently launched book called the Zooing the World. So over to you, sir, for your keynote address.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, good afternoon. We can hear you.
Yeah, you can all hear me, can't you?
Yes, we can.
Good. Those dangerous animals are the veterinarian and the architects. This is an old truism of nobody less than Mr. Durrell himself. And unfortunately for the architect, it's still very true. Not so for the veterinarian, luckily. Veterinarians working in zoos have developed as true zoo veterinarians, knowing that they're working for wild animals and not for just animals. Well, architects, however, until today, still consider animals as little furry human beings in need of concrete, it was said already, urban structures. And that's not only a waste of money, it's also ignoring the true aims. Zoos, we tend to agree, are education. Zoos are for inspiration. Zoos are maybe the best place to tell people about the wonders of wildlife. Not only to tell, but to make them feel that there is more in the world than their own urban environment. So why repeating this urban environment? Why not showing animals in their own context? It's part of our educational goal to do that right. Immersion, bringing people into the habitat of the animals, is so much more than just a gimmick of designers. It's an educational tool, and it's one of our best educational tools. Show, don't tell. It's the adagium of every novelist, but it is very true for those who are responsible for developing the zoos of the future too. Immersion, a big word, and sometimes it's a word people are afraid for. Oh, we cannot do that. Immersion, that requires millions of dollars. But that's not true. Immersion is about knowing what to do. It's about knowing all the little steps to make visitors they're in the animal habitat. And that's what it's all about. Because that makes the difference in attitude of the visitors. In the old zoo, as we see here on this picture, there's a clear dividing line. There is a fence, there is a second fence, there is a straight, well-kept green barrier in front, and visitors are on the one side, and animals are on the other side.
Sorry, Erik, it's a beautiful presentation. You just have to become full screen so that we are fully immersed. It's currently
Right, I will.
Yes.
I will do so. There we go.
There's a small button on the bottom right. You can
On the
press
bottom
that maybe.
right.
There is a screen. There's a TV screen. You can just press that.
On the bottom right. Yes. It's here. Yeah.
Yes.
Ah.
No, not that. Not that. It's just next to that. There is this TV screen. Next to that, yes, on the right.
Yes.
On the
Yeah,
right. Yes. Yes, please. Thank you.
That's better, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, but here we are back in the old-fashioned zoo with a clear dividing line between visitors and animals. And research has shown us that behavior of visitors is very, very, very little respectful in these circumstances. They go like, "Oh, look, we're going to see your brother. He's there on top." And they shout and they feel superior towards the animals. So we need to think about something else. And immersion gives that. Immersion is a very, very different situation where you bring your visitors into. They enter the habitat without knowing where to look. They don't know what to expect. And they feel entirely outside their convenience zone. So their voices become less loud. They are a little bit scared. And then all of a sudden, they're eye to eye with the animal. And that's such a different experience. And that is an experience comparable to the experience in nature. If you go and have a hike in the forest with your children, and after 3 hours of walking, maybe in the rain, maybe in the rough conditions, and all of a sudden you see a deer, well, this is the thing your child takes home and tells his grandma. Whereas when you see a whole series of deer enclosures in a zoo, it's nothing to tell about. It's this one unique experience you have all of a sudden, and we can do that at zoos. But how? The front of the exhibit, of course, is very, very important. Yes, like a beautiful habitat, but it's not immersion. It's very far from immersion. There's this beautiful, wonderful world, and then there is a straight line, like in the old days, and the visitors are on the other side. This is the scheme. A wild habitat on one side of the glass panel, and a well-kept urban park landscape on the other side. Immersion. Thing you have in this wild world should extend into the visitor world. The water, the stones, the vegetation, and tree trunks and everything you can think of. The lines should be entirely blurred to achieve this moment of wonder, to achieve this moment of sudden surprise. Like, for instance, this example of an exhibit in Singapore Zoo. You see a visitor, and all of a sudden the visitor sees an animal, a maned wolf in this case. He's able to take this picture, and there's no sign of a bear. You don't know where it is. There must be some kind of moat in between the animal and the visitor, but you don't experience it. You don't see it. First trick to make that happen is to provide the animal with a higher elevation than the visitors. If there is a little slope between you and the wall of the moat, you can't see the moat anymore in the first scheme. And in the second scheme, you can even make it better by having the visitation continuing. You need a little bit of hidden, of course, electricity anyhow to keep the animal. To prevent the animal going into the moat. And, well, animals, if they do respect electricity, you can use the space for additional vegetation. And there he is, the visitor, right in the middle of the vegetation, with the animal looming large all of a sudden in front of him. Like this wonderful example in the Indira Gandhi Zoo in Visakhapatnam city, where the animal standing above you on a higher level. You don't forget this moment anymore when you experience it as a visitor. How to do this with smaller exhibits? For smaller animals, it's easier, it's less cost effective, and still it can work. This is not a good example. This is a little example in a Dutch zoo that looks just like an ordinary cage, and instead of the obligatory tiles and smooth walls, there is rock work, but it's rock work used as wallpaper. It doesn't, suggest anything nature-like. This is a very different story in an American zoo, where the idea of how does the cave look like in nature comes first, and the second question is, where do we hide the glass panel as invisible as possible to create this landscape going from the visitor side into the animal side? And of course, you can have your little tricks. That's less important, but you can always do that, of course, by the bricks continuing in the animal exhibit, or even park furniture. Well, that's the of the exhibit, but it's also very important to think about the trail, the visitor path that guides the visitor along these fronts of the exhibits. In the old days, a very simple scheme. This was what happens very often: a perfect exhibit for the animal, the avoidance of sharp corners, a lot of vegetation, all kind of natural materials within the exhibit. And there's the visitor road right in front of it, with a lot of space to look at the animal. And there is the animal, most typical and the only space of the exhibit where you can't see it. So what's the answer to zoos? Let's create more visitors pathways to expose the animal wherever it is. But a very different way of doing it is trying to see before where the animal could be, and then having several zones where visitors can look, can spot, can try if they find him, and wherever he is, there's always a little corner where he can be spotted. And these, various ways, these various locations where you can spot the animal comes very close to nature already. You try to look a little bit better, but you don't see it, so you need to go on and see if you're lucky elsewhere. Selling your exhibit several times. That is what it is all about. And along the trail, on the spaces where you don't see the animal, it's not boring at all. Here, for instance, the example of these various zones where you look at the animal different ways, sometimes from above, sometimes close by, sometimes in the water, sometimes out of the water. But between that, all kind of other things happen. There are volunteers. There are elements of the natural habitats. There are skulls or other elements of the animals. There are maybe tracks. There are all sorts of other things that prove that there isn't. There are physical challenges. Children are not only little adults. They are creatures in their own right, and they want to have a little bit of adventure, climbing, flying, and having more adventurous animals, ways of seeing than just standing on the pavement. Look, and then there is, of course, education. And what can be said of that is a lot of zoos have a sign saying, well, this isn't this animal. And yes, then you do see that animal, but that's not how it works in nature. In nature, you see the animal first, and then you ask yourself, what is that? And then you need to have your field guide to give answer to that question. But first creating the moment of wonder, first creating the surprise, first creating the question, and only then answering it. The formal education comes always after the animal. So with all these elements being part and parcel of this animal experiencing experience, design is much more comparable to creating a movie. We curators, directors, zoo designers who make these experiences are really film directors rather than architects. It's about combining the right amount, the right number of emotions. It's creating the right sequence. It's planning where you see little pieces of the animal, where you don't do it, where you have a little education, where you have a little wow moment. So it's playing with all these items and bringing them together in storyline. And when you have all these elements and the right place where you can see them, it's only then that you translate your scheme into a real map and make it a design. And putting it in a large context of the whole zoo, something that works very well is having a main road that is surveyable. And creates a very clear view of where you're going. Some of the Indian zoos have, incredibly higher attendancy. So you need to know where you're going. But when you're going into these habitats on a small trail, you are lost. Well, that's what you feel. But because it's a trail, because it's a loop, the only thing you can be sure about is that you'll always be back on this main road. So this is a combination of combining the requirement of adventure and the requirement of creating real nature. The size of the exhibit is another thing to ponder for a moment. It might not even be so important if you talk about visitor experience. Visitors always complain about the size of exhibits. They think it's too small. Like, for instance, this Danish elephant exhibit. People say, oh, that's not very, very, very big for elephants. So what the solution can be, very surprisingly, is making it smaller instead of, if you have a little piece of vegetation in the middle, a little peninsula of green, then visitors at viewing spot A cannot see the entire exhibit, and they have the idea that there is a whole world for the elephants behind the green zone. And equally on visitor spot B, they can't see the main part. So you create this sense of a big place where you can't see the borders. This is supposed to be the savannah in a Dutch zoo, but it's rectangular, and savannas, of course, are not rectangular. Savannas are endless. So it can't possibly give a suggestion of a savanna, whereas this exhibit is for baboons. It's zigzaggy. It has a very irregular shape. All the viewings for visitors over very different experiences. Sometimes long viewing lines, sometimes very intimate settings where you see the animals very, 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 very close. So it's more surprising for the visitors, and it's equally as it is for the elephants in the last example, more interesting for the animals too. When you don't see all the members of the group, you're much better off, and there is much more provocation to to go from one place to another. Another important thing is habitat. This is a very beautiful exhibit in the Lucknow Zoo. It's green. It's very large. There are real trees, so it's perfect for the bears. But still, it's visitors going around. Whereas it would even be a little bit better when visitors could go into the exhibit instead of out. The first sketch shows what happens. If you go all around, you see not only the animals, you see all the other visitors too. And every step you take, changes the perspective, but not very much so. You know where you're going, and it's not very different if you go all around. Whether in example 2, it works different. You see animals on the right, on the left, in front of you, and you are surrounded by the animals. So this idea of trying to create spaces where you go into the habitat works well in immersion, or where the animals go over you, like coatis here, or orangutans here in Singapore. And there's so many magnificent Indian animals that could go over visitors, like squirrels, langur species. That's it. The back of the exhibit, that's where usually a large amount of money is floating into. These structures tend to be very expensive, very obtrusive, and in most cases not very natural. Look at the chimpanzee exhibit here in the American Zoo. Chimpanzees come from the rainforest, not from a rocky landscape with waterfalls. So it's expensive story. This works better. Meerkats, and you see some layers of vegetation in the end, but you don't see where the back moat is. You don't see where it ends. It just looks like these animals coming from nature, or better, you are in nature and you're all of a sudden meeting these animals. Or this beautiful African rhino exhibit in the Mysore Zoo. Grass in the front, vegetation in the background. In short, this animal is surrounded by green, which is so much better than any architectural design work. You see the exhibit is sloping up, and that makes it easy to hide modes in the back of the exhibit, which you need, of course, to hide it, especially for carnivorous animals. They need to be solid. Here's another example in the Patmaya Naidu Zoo in Darjeeling. You don't know where these mountain ungulates come from. They are part of a continuous landscape, and this is a bit the scheme of the trick. In this British zoo, the chimpanzees are in a area that is very reminiscent to a prison with a large a tall wall around it. Nothing reflects the rainforest. And what you can do with spending not very much money, maybe even less money, is if you look at the top picture, you see the situation where the visitor looks over the front wall, looks against the back wall. But if you spend a little bit more, a few more hours for your bulldozers to work, make it all sink into the earth, have a back wall that's invisible, have a front wall that's invisible, and expose only the chimpanzees and natural areas to your and in their natural area to your visitors. And if you do that, you can also combine animal species like small mammals, small carnivores in the ground, on the foreground, hidden moats in the back, and ungulates or larger predators in the behind it, like here the rhinos and the cheetahs supposedly combined in one visual experience. So we talked about the front, we've talked about the back, we talked about the path that connects it all, and to connect all these things, you should think a little bit, not as a designer, but as Mother Nature. How would this landscape have come into being when it was nature that made all these rocks, these slopes, all the vegetation patterns, everything that's part and parcel of this experience. For instance, if you look at this Kopje style rock in a Spanish zoo, the water comes from the top in large quantity. Well, that of course would never happen. Why would there be so much water on the top of such a pinnacle? So, and this is very typical, of course. You see many of these things in zoos. But the second scheme shows a much more natural situation where the water seeks the lowest point and floats down like it would do in nature. And when you have your scheme in place with all your experiences, with all your viewing zones. Oh, look at this terrible example also in a Dutch zoo where there is a piece of rockwork coming out of the ground all of a sudden like a mushroom without any contextualization, which really is happening in many zoos. But if you do that, if you try to position everything as if it would have come organically from the ground, then making this puzzle ends with very, 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 very different outcomes. It ends up with landscapes, with gradients, with valleys, and that's the fun of the puzzle of good zoo design, to make it to do it in a way that it doesn't look as if it was you having done it. And this is an example. Here you do see the rocky structures of the mountains, but you see also how they emerge from a natural green elevation. You also see that it's the water that has caused these barren spots, these barren rocky spots in the landscape. In short, it gives the credible feeling of a natural area. Here's a badger seat, a small a carnivore confrontation where you go into as a visitor, be with the badgers, and where it's very important that you mimic the colors of the natural soil in its various layers to get it done as a part of this natural landscape. Or the prairie dogs in this exhibit where the scent of same color as the artificial scent of the underground structures where the visitor can go into to see the animals in their dens. So in short, it's important to try to minimize the front and the back, try to minimize the barriers in general. It's not about barriers, it's about what's in between the barriers, about the natural landscape. Then create your storyline, create your and color it all as a natural piece of nature. And for not so much money, that can be a tool of your educational program that could be very, very important to make your visitors feel what an animal is, to make your visitors feel what part of the world, what part of which habitat it belongs to, and which can create an unforgettable experience. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very interesting. I learned, especially for me personally, it was that I have to think like Mother Nature and not as a designer. And so that's the best part. And in terms of to minimize barriers and to think organically, I think that's a very, very new and interesting concept that you have brought in. And to continue the thread, we have a tremendous response today. We have more than 100 people watching live, but we will try to take the questions in the end. And as they say that the devil is in the detail, so I would now like to invite Dr. Rommel Mehta, who is a landscape architecture expert of great repute in India. He has retired as Senior Professor, Department of Landscape Architecture, School of Planning and Architecture, SPA, New Delhi, and has been a former member of the expert group on zoo designing of the Central Zoo Authority. He has guided and evaluated many zoos on infrastructure development, landscaping, and zoo architecture on behalf of CZA, and he has co-authored the book on design guidelines for zoos, which has sent in a benchmark of details, standards, and best practices for zoos to follow. So over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be presenting my part of the story which I still haven't been able to communicate fully, even after trying for 15 years. And in a lighter vein, it was mentioned that we should follow nature and try and avoid following designers. But the greatest designer is Mother Nature. And the whole idea behind zoo designing is actually to first understand and then follow that. Once you do that, no amount of, you don't require any other designing at all. So if I just, Snagya, are you able to see my presentation?
So we just saw it for 1 minute.
That was a drawing, this one.
Not this one.
Now,
Yes, now we can. Yes,
yeah.
sir.
You see, Dr. Erik gave us a excellent overview of the entire design situation and process. But I think I was fortunate to understand what he was saying after 15 years of getting involved in zoos. So one of the problems in zoo designing and this design automatically should be understood as conservation design. Uh, um, uh, um, this has to be somehow or the other communicated to all the players who are involved in the zoo designing process. And when I say that, I actually mean right from the governmental authority who is concerned with the zoos, down to the zoo directors, down to the contractors, down to the site supervisors, and so on. So in this entire thing, and I incidentally would not exclude architects in inverted commas because in the first slide, Dr. Erik had shown the two, the veterinarians and the architect, and he was absolutely right because what we are talking about is not architects, what we are talking about is zoo architects. Now, there's a big difference in the two, which I'll explain as we go along. By and large, my two, three things before I begin. I'd like to present my the format within the framework within which I would actually be presenting, because this is a little away from the conventional presentations that I've come across in zoos. And this now relates to what is seen and what is intended and what is suggested by everyone who is concerned with the creation of a good zoo. And how do we achieve that? So there's a big gap between what is said, what is told to the people who are involved, and the achievement. And as we go along, you will realize what I'm saying. So this presentation, verbal and graphic, is a little distinct. But I would request everyone who is viewing it to please be with me and just view it in a way that I experienced when I started about 15, 16 years back, my first involvement with zoos, again, through the Central Zoo Authority. And at that time, for many years, I went and so on, and I kept quiet. and I tried to understand the relation between design and zoos. Zoo is not an entity by itself. It is a multidisciplinary situation, and one person has to control it. So, second, please relate it to this, which I have already mentioned, and then these suggestions or these aspects that are being mentioned, they may concern a new zoo, an upgradation project or an expansion project, and so on. Now, see the essential aspects. When I am saying this is my experience, and unless I am able to put it across frankly, and this is no reflection on anybody, but zoo landscape and architecture is not a casual hobby. This is a very, very serious business. But since we cannot explain nature beyond an extent, so it is the same situation. And yet, what we need to do is to have documents, drawings, meetings, which ensure that what is intended is what is achieved. Then this is an interdisciplinary experience. So what is seen, there are so many services involved, there are designs involved, there is a stormwater drainage, there's the water management, there's the electrical services involved, there's HVAC, there is the security system. So it should not be taken. So once a brief is given by the concerned authority, it may be the zoo director, it may be anybody else, or it may be a group of people, that this is what we wish to achieve. And this brief would actually have two aspects to it. One would be the objective aspect, that we need, this is our approved collection plan, and we need so many animals, so many birds, and so on. The other is, there are many things which are subjective. So they might try and communicate to you that this is the kind of environment that we want. Achha, now it would be excellent if this is explained at the initial stage, because if somebody wants half of the zoo to be paved, and they would give various explanations for it, that it is because of this, because of that, and so on and so forth. But then it can be sorted out at the beginning. This last point should not be misunderstood at all, but it has been my relatively recent experience, and that two things. One relates to professional fees, and the second relates to the time that is allowed. So someday somebody just comes up and tells you that we have to make this submission within 3 days, so give me a zoo plan. Now, we have enough of our friends who do that, but I would suggest that that is where the disaster begins. So it requires stage by stage, out-of-pocket expenses, which have to be given to the architect for services, for work, for preparation of drawing, for time spent, and a minimum time is required for any kind of drawing, or for that matter, any kind of thinking around the project. So this is something which must be very clearly understood. Now, in the opening remarks by the member secretary, I think the member secretary in essence gave an excellent kind of a tablet view of what we are trying to achieve. So in this case, the best ex-situ facilities would be when they are designed as close as possible to the natural habitat of the animal. These things should not be understood as words. When we are speaking, one should kind of imbibe them, try and understand. So I'll show you the photographs. So in other words, if you have selected a site which you say is suitable for a zoo, then after the project is finished, the site for all practical purposes should actually look the same. And why I say that? Because if you said that the site was suitable for the zoo, then it should have the requisite undulations. We should have natural barriers. We should have natural modes. We should, and so on. For all practical purposes, although I am aware that things are going on, but there should be no question that by the time you finish, you can't even recognize the site, even from the surroundings. We should, from all, because that is against all principles of conservation. So from the ecological point of view, again, Dr. Erik had also mentioned this, I remember. And from the, you see, from the ecological point of view, he mentioned about the cost of the project and so on. In my opinion, we are not totally, but in many situations, just overspending. All that we need to do is not put in our design inputs, but put in our restraint. When there is something which is already there, we need to appreciate that in terms of vegetation, in terms of ecology, in terms of geology, in terms of the soil that is available, the water availability, aquifers. Once we recognize that, then all that we have to do is to exercise restraint, because it would be impossible to level the site, clean it, and then start again. I'll show you some photographs. Please keep in mind that when we are talking of conservation, that conservation cannot be done in a 15 by 15 size room. No, conservation requires a certain scale. And by and large, except for very few zoos, we don't have a scale which can really give you an ecological, regional ecology by itself. So in other words, we can create smaller ecological units within the zoo. And I've seen, I'll show you a photograph also. I saw one recently in Prague, and it was very sensitively done. So it was ecological unit. But by and large, the zoos are not large enough, and they have too much of a human imprint on them. There are visitors, thousands of them. So by and large, we should be very protective of what is already at site. Now, here's the site. So what I just mentioned, and actually I visited this site many years ago, and we had gone there to give approval for construction of a zoo. Now, when I went there, it was just heavenly. Everything that you required for a zoo was already there. So now the whole thing was, how do you insert every facility or the functional requirement of a zoo within this site? That was the requirement. And as a zoo designer, I would suggest that we should not go on pretending, for example, that we might in this situation require a parking for 200 cars and some two-wheelers. Now in this, when we say this parking has to be designed. This parking cannot be the parking that you have in Connaught Place, or for that matter, an airport parking. The concept of all elements within a zoo have to be kind of now change and change fast. Because in India, unfortunately, there was very little change for almost 15 years. Now that we have got a chance, and whatever we build today would become a benchmark. And that is the most dangerous thing, because everybody who comes after us would imagine that this is a zoo. But it is actually not a zoo. So in this case, we have achieved this, not in a zoo, but in a township in Assam. You go there, we went there 24 years before, you go there today, you will miss it. You would not even know that a township had come up. So in other words, please be reassured that it can be achieved. You can just go through this, but each and every paragraph and word that I've written it very carefully. From the environmental point of view, it is possible to get to as close to the nature as possible. And but we cannot get, as I mentioned earlier, close to nature ecologically. that is a very difficult situation. But we can get close to it in terms of an limited environmental point of view. We can control sounds. We can have large, soft, vegetated areas within the zoo. So to that, or we can have an inclusive situation. But not ecology. We should protect environment. We can try. One aspect where the zoo designer can achieve a lot is the visual. So this in zoo parlance relates to inclusive design or immersion design, and we'll discuss this as we go on. But this can be achieved. This is possible by appropriate planting and design of other elements within the zoo. Now, I would like to please reiterate once more that when I use this word that this is possible by appropriate planting design, it has to be taken very, very seriously, because even after 35 years of doing planting design, I really feel every time I sit down, it takes me a long, long time to design anything that's suitable in terms of planting. Enrichment can enhance immensely the visual experience. So these are aspects which we can all attempt. Now, although in this case, as I go along, I'll make some one-line comment that enrichment has to be part for the human beings, which is the enrichment of the zoo, and then it has to be the enclosure enrichment, which has to be for the animals. And this has to relate to the characteristics of the animal. And I've seen situations, as Dr. Erik, I think, mentioned, that I had taken a photograph, and just for the heck of it, I just asked somebody, what do you think? He said, this is a children's playing area. But it was actually the bear enclosure. So for it to climb, they had given a ladder. For it to, now all these things require time, effort, and very sensitive and respect for the designer. Here's the situation. I mean, this is a zoo, and I'll show you some other photographs and this they have achieved by appropriate planting. But when we say appropriate planting, please don't take it as a situation where somebody tells you that, yes, I'll do the planting, and he'll pick up some plants which he has from the next door nursery and just plant it. So these are plants which are carefully selected from the regional native species, a native genus, and then carefully merged together to form a community relationship so that they can sustain by themselves. This I've just written what I've just told you. Planting in zoo design requires a highly specialized input. Conservation. Next, I'll come very briefly. You can otherwise read. You see, this concept of conservation is like the elephant, and everybody understands it in his or her own way. So the conservation can be conservation breeding. For the landscape architect, the conservation could be something else. For an urban designer, the conservation can be something else completely. But in this case, conservation is a well understood, comprehensive site planning concept. And in one line, I would suggest, if you wish to remember it, that a site is given and you have to put a project on it. So the site has to be studied, the project has to be studied, and these two have to be combined. So for the present limited time, if that is kept in mind, and when we say that the site has to be studied, it means that the site has to be studied in terms of its topography, in terms of existing vegetation, in terms of the drainage patterns which are existing. And if we disturb any one of them, we are asking for trouble. So whatever are our project requirements, they have to be integrated with this. And if they cannot be integrated, then they cannot be integrated. Because if somebody tells you that on a 5-acre site, I want an airport, we can give him a very logical answer why he cannot have an airport. Because the functional requirements cannot be met. So in this case, all these things have a deeper meaning which should be discussed before the project is started. Uh, uh, this is a small area within the Prague Zoo, and there was a board outside, and the person there, the director, he seemed to be very proud about it. So I asked him why. So he had seen some species of tadpoles and fishes which were not found anywhere else in the Czech Republic. And when he recognized them, they created this small area and specially planted these plants around it, and they've created a mini ecological or a unit where he was very happy that those things were breeding and they were able to generate and achieve what they wanted to. So in this case, I've just written that this may look like a wild set of planting, but this would require an expert to give his input, not only input in words, but input in drawings. I said this 2-3 this thing, you can just glance through it. And I am just giving an example of my 4 stages that I began my zoo experience. But at that nascent stage, I was trying to understand behavior because I was somehow or the other, I was involved with some very experienced zoo wildlife. So I just understood. But I did not start commenting, which is also I have seen recently a trend that if someone walks into a zoo and he comes back after 2 hours, and this architect friend of ours imagines that he is a zoo expert, and he picks up a couple of jargon and he talks about tigers and he talks about enclosures. No, this is a very dangerous thing, and we should, like everyone else, respect. I still, after 15, 16 years, I have never talked about what injection to give for a certain treatment. Although I may have heard about it, but we avoid. So in this case, this was my experience. So I began and then I acquired. And it should be realized that every zoo design, every specific zoo has a history, it has a present, and it has a projected future. Every zoo is unique in that aspect because of its own cultural situation, because of its topographical situation, locational situation, and because of its projected future, which means the funds available, what is intended, what are the political bosses, or how do they look at it for the future zoo. So all that. So it should not be a situation which I have come across very often, that we say that we had gone to that zoo and I think this is there and you put it there. So principally, yes, but as an element, you have to review it, redesign it, and then place it. So since the time is less, but I can talk more about it. But this is the essence of these last 3 paragraphs. Actually, now you see about 15 years back or 16, 17 years back when I got involved with zoos. At that time, with my background, I was talking of drawings and so on and so forth. And we were receiving sometimes slips of paper, sometimes sketches of the kind that I have shown here. And it was being suggested that we start building the zoo on this basis. These sketches were given by very highly experienced person. That individual would have had an image, he would have had the requisite experience, he would have. But when this was communicated, then everybody around thought that he has understood. And the amazing thing was that during the process of communication, the intent, the work sequence, layout, and specifications were lost. So the project got completed, but the intent got lost. So if you had, and the kind of thing that we see through with walkthroughs and perspectives today, you might see that today, and at the end of the project, you can't even recognize whether this walkthrough belongs to the same project or not. So, in other words, we have to now create a situation where decisions are taken collectively and then we get the result what we intended. So that is a process which is now well established throughout the world, not only for this project, but as a landscape or architectural project. And we must follow that routine for zoo projects also. This is just describes what I have just mentioned. And these are the stages through which the project should go. You see, in the earlier comment that I made, in every community, there is a good doctor, a very good doctor, and a useless doctor. Similarly, we have in our community also, and every community. Now, how do you make sure that somebody whom you have given the responsibility to design a zoo, that after the zoo is built or during this thing, you have to, because as a director of a zoo or anybody else who is responsible for the zoo design or the zoo execution, it is not possible for you to go to the site every day. And even if you go to the site every day, you are not qualified to check whether the pipe has been connected properly or this amount of. So therefore, there has to be a situation where the authority, the director or anybody else should be able to hold the zoo designer responsible. Now that can only be done if the exact the design is communicated, and if the documents are properly prepared. So on an average, somebody can say that if 50% of the zoo is built, then the director can easily, sitting in his office, ask that if 50% of the zoo is by and large done, then how is it that 80% expenditure has been done? So he just has to sit in the office and find out. So, so that is why I've written this specifically, that this holds true for all, including the designer, the landscape architect, or whoever, and that somehow or the other he should be answerable. And then this process continues. Then you have this, then you have the tender drawings, the work is awarded, the working drawings and schedules are prepared, execution of the project should be done by professionals or project management firm, overseen but not overruled by administrative authority. Because if this is done and it for some reason it becomes necessary, then it can be done, but then this would affect the drawings, this would affect the document, this would affect the expenses, this would affect the schedules. So once it is accepted, then we go ahead. But by and large, it should be avoided. And every word that I have written here, it requires a lot of effort, inputs, so time and has to be given. These are the stages. We have to take decisions. We have to brainstorm with all concerned and arrive at a concept. This concept, I'm only making one line suggestion, but we can talk about it some other time. That when we say concept, the concept is a scaled concept. It is not that somebody has drawn some circles on the drawing and you approve it. No, it can be circles, it can be freehand, but it has to be so that when finally the drawings are done and the project is implemented, then it should have the form and the layout of the kind that you had imagined. It should not be something which is completely, and for reasons, the arguments are given. This happened, that happened, but all what has happened must be, from the point of view of a professional, be foreseen. And then we have the execution part. You can just read this. I have gone through a project, particularly with some foreign government projects, very significant project. And there I came across a situation which was excellent. And they would ask for a 10% submittal. And that 10%, they will give everybody a brief. We want this from the architect, we want this from the landscape architect, we want this from the quantity surveyor, and so on and so forth. And those limited things were given, and they were approved by the authorities, or they were sent back for correction and then approved. Then we went on for the 30% submittal. Again, the requirements were given. Then we went in for 60% submittal. But there was no question that at the 60% submittal, somebody would, because by this time we had organized the services, we had organized the drawing, so it was never a situation where at the 60% submittal stage, somebody just came and he said, I've got another 5-acre area, so please take care of it. How can we take care of it? It has to be then properly designed and accommodated. So in other words, if there is ever such a situation, then it has to be paid for in terms of everybody. So this actually just keeps a restriction on all concerned. And in this case, we actually, by this system, you see, for the first 2 years, there was no work on the site, but the project had begun. Now here the impression is that unless somebody is working at the site, somebody is digging or removing trees, the project has not begun. No, the project has begun, and at the end of 1.5 years, there were 400 drawings which were totally coordinated in terms of electrical, plumbing, anything that anybody imagined. Where would we get the electricity from? Where would we get the animals from? All that was sorted out, and within 2 years, that entire, this was in relation to an embassy, and that entire embassy with marble coming from Italy, with something else coming from Japan, with everything was done and built. So in 2 years, this whole project was done. This is one way, which Dr. Erik had mentioned earlier in his mail also. This is one way of making sure that the project is done in less cost than the estimated cost. If you control the time, everything will be perfect. So in most cases, it's the time which is stretched which leads to all kinds of unnecessary expenditure. Actually, now we have these kind of drawings. And Dr. Erik had also shown there were drawings. So these are drawings which are not for the construction of the zoo. These are drawings for approval, that this is what we intend to do as a designer. So somebody might say, but these drawings are to scale. So if you see this, that this is going a little down, then it means at the side, this is going a little down. And if this is going a little up, then it means it is going a little up. So it is not just freehand. So in other words, and after this is explained and approved, then we go ahead and start working towards the tender and the working drawings. At the working drawing stage, we have this, what you see is, I've just added color to it, but otherwise what you see is a working drawing. So in this case, it would give the layout, the location where this is going to be placed, the dimension, the number of kraals that we have, and so on and so forth, and what we intend to do in terms of the cages, the keeper's room, the galleries, and so on and so forth. But this is one plan. Along with this, we would have the section elevation, and along with this, we would have the complete details as we go along. And in this case, again, I'm mentioning that this is for the use of the contractor and the site supervisor, but it would be very good if the person who is a controlling authority in terms of a zoo director or anybody else, if he or she also kind of reviews it and is able to and becomes familiar with what is going on. This is an example of a working drawing. So I've seen situations where actually at site, the contractor has been told, please make a toe wall from here to there. This contractor said, okay. Now, neither did he ask for the foundation, nor did he ask for the height of the wall, nor did he. But these things are critical. This height of the toe wall would depend on whether the site has been filled, whether the site has been cut, And if you want to make a toe wall of 6 inches high, but there has been a filling of 1.5 foot, then you have to have that 1.5 foot going below the ground. So in other words, all these are going to have very serious impact on conservation and costs. But this is what is required for any, and they would be depending upon project to project. Now, there could be situations which you see here, and if one has designed something like this, it is absolutely mandatory that major drawings, layout drawings are given. Otherwise, what you had imagined while sitting on the board would never, while sitting on the board, or as a zoo designer, I would suggest that you go to the site as frequently as possible, because maximum ideas you get from there. But again, whatever you do, this cannot, what you see on the board cannot be communicated to the contractor verbally. So this has to be. Then this is a situation where we made the kind of site planning that I was mentioning. You get the site data, data in terms of topography, in terms of soil, in terms of animals which are there depending upon the size, the kind of animals which are, in this case, we had animals outside and we had animals inside. So when we were designing the boundary wall, we had to ensure that the outside animals would not come in, and the inside animals, if they escape from the enclosure, are not able to go out. So, and then the existing vegetation and so on. So once we get, so you would probably have 10, 12 drawings of this kind of the site, and then you would come up with what you see on the right side, which is the concept plan. But this concept plan and every path or road that you see is actually worked out, because we would, these are worked out on the basis of gradients, slopes, and so on and so forth. And these blues that you see, these are actually the existing drainage pattern of the site, where we accepted them as they are, because if we touch them, then it would lead to all kinds of problems. And these are the enclosures. And along on the sides of these drainage patterns, since we didn't have that data, we didn't have the high flood level. So we kept about 10, 12 meters on either side, that in case it floods, it doesn't disturb anything. And I won't talk very much, but in this case, I've seen zoos being built where he had given some path, and this fellow at the side has gone on and drawn that, laid that out. And when asked, what is it? He said, I have understood. Now, this was a situation which was actually a dense, dry, thorny forest, and there was no question of for example, in this case, I could not give him a 50 or 60 meter radius and ask him to draw the curve. So in this case, we had to adopt another method, but in one line, we need drawings which are able to, with the help of which we are able to achieve what we had achieved. And in this case, I would suggest that wherever you have large areas of zoo, you should not start from one end and realize that by the time you have reached the other end, it is 30 meters short or 30 meters beyond. So this has to be laid out initially at the site. One very important aspect, which I would just mention because there is no time, is that for every site, when we say that we have selected a site which is suitable for a zoo, it implies generally that it is well vegetated, there is an existing ecological situation there. So the first thing that needs to be done, and this is again an extension of what Dr. Erik had suggested, that the first thing that needs to be done is the protection of what is there at site. And this protection is not only initial, this protection has to be carried out throughout the execution of the project. Because otherwise, we completely lose what we already have. So in this case, this preparatory operation, for example, would include the protection of trees which are there at site. They would include the protection of the existing drainage pattern. So you might have small bridges or culverts over the existing this thing. You might have to protect the trees with fences around it, all this would actually cost money. So therefore, in the budget, there has to be a head of preparatory operations, which I have not seen by and large in any zoo budget. So in this case, we must have that, and this should be accepted as part of the project. And this is something which I had mentioned earlier, that whatever we are doing today will be a benchmark for what is to come. So we have a certain professional and moral responsibility. And this is going very specific to my experience, because sometimes they say that architecture is useless. I can do this better than he can do it. No, you take corrective action if there has been an unpleasant experience with some concerned architect. It's the person who is at fault, not the discipline. Architecture and landscape architecture is a wonderful discipline. So you must kind of distinguish and realize what is required for a good project to be finished. And in this case, we have talked about the detailing. I've shown you only one drawing, the quality of work and construction and bills of quantity and specifications. You can please remember in the limited time, but any time anybody wishes to discuss it further with me, one can write a book on either each one of them. And these are very critical to the completion of the project. And I'll just take another 2-3 minutes to show you 3 or 4 photographs and drawings. You can just see it yourself. You see, what you see here is amazingly, which seems very natural, but all this has been created. And I think the creator needs to be given some award, because this has been done very sensitively. And this is what is required for all our zoos. In this case, sorry. You see, here I put across one line, very, very critical comment, which I have come across in all my zoo projects. You see, what has happened is that when we suggest that we need to do this in the zoo, when we need to do that in the zoo, we need to use this material. Generally, the immediate comment is that this is not a part of our schedule of rates. The schedule of rates, Dr. Erik, is actually from state to state sometimes. And it is a document in which if you take an item as it is, then you don't need any analysis. It is accepted, the rate is accepted. Now, in this case, you see those have been prepared largely for universities, for airports, for houses, but they haven't. There is no document which has been prepared for the zoo-specific situation. So what happens is that today, if we take up a project, then there might be 50 items which are scheduled items, and there may be 200 items which are non-scheduled items, and that is not accepted. Now, this is the situation which is actually running. So wherever you wanted to do something which was suitable for the zoo, it is brought down and cut and related to an item which has to be used for an airport. Now, so I have written that design innovations will follow from a change in mindset, the determination to create a set of documents which are zoo specific. It is very important and very timely that we take this up. We don't have item specification for this. I think this was a brilliant idea, and he has actually used these. It's a part of a paved area, and he has used this also for water management, and he's draining away the water which is used from the for drinking water fountain and from other sources, and taken it to a situation where it is collected and so on. Now, what you see on the right, and if I tell someone, which I have told in 2 or 3 situations, that I want a thing like this, well, they say that there is no item for this. Well, then item has to be created. So we now need to take the next step in our zoo development, and neither is there an item for this, nor is there an item for this. I think all of us as a community should. This is something which we can avoid in most zoos and relate. This may please not be taken. I'm just giving an example. Not be taken for any particular zoo or personally, but we should avoid this. And when I say this, what it means is that this should be avoided in terms of if one thing which we can use for zoo designing, and that is the color palette. If we adopt a color palette which relates to vegetation, the natural colors, we would be able to achieve half our situation. So this is probably going against that. This is a zoo, elephant enclosure. And when I walked, and I walked into the next visitors viewing area, then I walked another 200 meters and again viewed it. It seemed the same. So this is almost half a kilometer of an enclosure, which one doesn't realize. And this is for elephants. And that is probably the reason that since we have given them enough space, the grass and the trees are not damaged that much. So this was a wonderful, this is in Prague. This is again a situation where functional requirements are there, yes, but then these should be actually camouflaged so that the overall impact of the environment is not lost. So in this case, you can hardly see the moat. And if I'm not wrong, I think Dr. Erik can correct me, for an elephant, this thing, which is about 1.5 or 2 feet high, with 1 or 2 hot wire lines, should be enough to prevent the animal, the elephant from coming this side, because it cannot lift itself. Any questions, please? Just give me 15 seconds more. I'll just show you the drawing, and no comments on that, but this is for your. Dr. Sonali, are you able to see the drawing?
No, sir. You need to share.
Are you able to see it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
This is just one example. If I think we don't have time now. Otherwise, I have 2, 3 other drawings which we can discuss. So in this case, even in a simple situation, this is not a very complicated path. But in this case, there was no way except to give these coordinates which are indicated above. And once these are laid out by the surveyor, can this path be aligned the way it is intended? In this case, one has to be careful that drawings would be required. And I have some other. Dr. Sonali, can I take some more time, or this is enough?
Fine, sir, but we have finished 1 hour, but if you have one more, we can do that. Yes, sir.
Okay, just one. Can you see this?
Yes, we can. We can see.
You see, this is one drawing which is indicating what we call the grade line. So in this case, the dotted lines in black show the existing grade, and the red line show the proposed grade. So this entire site has to be prepared by grading to receive anything, because everything, including the planting, would have to come from the finished grade. So in this case, all your enclosures or everything would actually come from. So we have these drawings. I'm just giving you a glimpse to all the viewers that unless we have that and one item in which nobody would be, it's a very, very tricky situation in case of earthwork. So you would never know how much earth had come or how much earth is required unless the grading plan is prepared. One last drawing. This is just a drawing indicating many of the variations that we had wanted in a certain zoo. So these are combinations of rough and rubble, so on. And then this was actually something which we were designing, over which these are actually, and the color would be green, these are leaves. So this is water. So one can just kind of walk over it and so on. So all these may be pavers, cobblestones. So, and we give sketches that in these areas we need this kind of construction, and everything, including the documents, are prepared on this basis. So, thank you for being with me and being patient. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Having been a biologist myself, I think this is a new interdisciplinary aspect that we need much more time, much more reading, and certainly much more thought. And we had a fantastic response on the YouTube. With you, yet another. Take myself to. We give a preference to the questions coming registered participants, mail. Is that how can we enclosure design more important enrichment? Dr. Erik, sir, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, yes, I can. I can hear part of what you say. My answer to this would be enclosure design, and then I missed the part. What else?
Sir, is it
Screen was
that
frozen for a moment. Yeah.
Sir, like, do we need to? How do we include the behavior, the physiological requirements of the animal into our enclosure design? And
Right.
and enrichment vis-a-vis design, what should be the priority?
Yes. Well, animals are living their entire life in the zoos. Visitors go home at 5 o'clock. So I think the animals' needs need to be the condition that's sacred to every design in any circumstance. But if you turn the question upside down and ask what's more important, why you do it all, I would say it's the visitors. Zoos are there for visitors, to make them enthusiasts, to advocate for conservation. So summing these two angles up, you could say animal well-being, enrichment, and everything else the animal need is the condition, and the visitor experience is the goal.
Absolutely. And go at the time. I will now ask the second question to Dr. Rommel Mehta. So we are running short of time. So the question to you, sir, is that zoos may adhere to minimum standards. Yet if the zoo is old, how can better zoo design be achieved with limitation of space, funds and manpower? And can we minimize the use of steel, construction, and cement and concrete in our zoos?
I can break this up into two sub-answers. Number one, we must take, even if it is required, an unpleasant decision. So depending upon the space, if our priority is to create good design for the zoo, and if the population of animals or otherwise is now large and is not able to be handled within that area, then we should restrict that. That is number one. And there is no compromise on the space requirements or the habitat requirements of animals within the enclosure, because whatever kind of reading or research I've done, it is amazing that I did not come across any direct relationship between the natural habitat area of an animal, of a particular animal, and its scaled down requirement in the enclosure. So one has to just kind of go by judgment. So by and large, we should actually restrict and ourselves and not go on requesting or acquiring or requesting CZA to increase the number of animals that are required. And the second part of the question was what, Nalit, there was?
Is the reduction of concrete and RCC material? Both of you have mentioned, but maybe again.
Yeah, no, in this case, actually, instead of reduction, it should be that it should not be introduced in the first place at all. We have seen, actually, I was going to show you some slides, but I thought that would not be proper. Where there are huge areas of paved areas, it is almost like the requirement for an aircraft to land. And there is no judgment, because this is not a situation where we are going to have, we might have many visitors, but it's not a community kind of a gathering space. There are design principles which can easily avoid, even if you require large areas, or there are design principles which can help so that wherever one is stationed, he or she is not able to see the total pavement together. But besides that, ecologically, we should avoid it at all. One line technical, this thing is that if we increase the paved areas, which are the impervious areas, the runoff increases, which is bad for the environment.
Right, sir. Understood.
Hey, your mic is not working.
Right, sir. Sorry, sir. That was good, sir. We've noted, and of course, this recording would be available for the future as well. So I'll put the last question to Dr. S.P. Yadav, sir. So the question which came in is that what needs to be done to sensitize civil engineers, architects, local masons towards better understanding of animal synergy be achieved at the local level?
Sonali, very right. There is really lack of capacity in zoo architecture, especially zoo designing. Probably we need to clone Dr. Mehta and Dr. Erik, so that we need more of experts in the country at the world level, because as Erik has also pointed out, Dr. Mehta also said, zoo designing or zoo architecture or landscape architecture is not business as usual. It's highly specialized job. And then after designing, converting into the action and reality, that itself is a very big challenge. Because as a designer, one may prepare a wonderful, brilliant design, then to convert into the reality means mason has to understand what needs to be done. So all these things are very highly specialized, and I understand that there is a lack of capacity, and the responsibility goes to the senior people like Dr. Mehta and all to build the capacity and bring in the next generation of architects who will specialize in zoo designing and this kind of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and everybody else, sir, Dr. Erik and Dr. Rommel Mehta, and the fabulous audience we have had today. Interestingly, we got a question, I think in Spanish, and somebody was viewing from Nigeria. So I think, sir, we have a lot of requirement, a lot of capacity building to do, especially in terms of zoo design. And this was one of our first attempts to understand this topic. And I really appreciate the time and effort that all of you have put together on a Sunday today. And we look forward to having you all with us as experts to guide us and to guide the zoos in their future endeavors. As always, I thank the backroom team of Caesar Day and of the team Mysuru Zoo who have helped conducting this webinar today. And thank you once again, and we'll end this meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric and Dr. Mehta. Your presentations were really brilliant. I really liked so much. Eric, especially this double moat kind of thing, means for the visitor, it looks like the animals are in the same enclosure, but in between there is double moat. And where exactly is this kind of structure done? Can you name the zoo?
Yeah, it's certainly no rocket science.
Yeah. But it's fantastic, and I have never seen this in India, just in our Indian zoos. And thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Mehta, as always, you are brilliant, and we need to really clone you.
Thank you.
Okay.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.